She left me standing at the altar in front of 200 people, but what I discovered 3 weeks later about why she really ran away changed everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and the woman I'd planned to spend my life with. Well, hello there, folks. Welcome back to After Her Lies. I'm your host, Frank Morrison, coming to you from my little corner of Nebraska where the corn grows tall and the stories run deep. Before we dive into today's tale, I've got to ask you something that's been weighing heavy on my heart. I see those viewer numbers climbing every week, and it just warms this old soul. But here's the thing that gets me a little choked up. 96% of you wonderful people watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel. Now, I'm not trying to guilt trip anybody, but that number just makes me sadder than a wet dog in winter. If you're getting something out of these stories, if they're touching your heart even a little bit, would you mind hitting that subscribe button for an old-timer? It'd mean the world to me. Now let me pour myself a cup of coffee here and tell you about Margaret. Sweet, beautiful Margaret Kellerman, and the day she turned my whole world upside down. This story takes place back in 1984, when I was a young man of 25 with more dreams than sense, and a heart bigger than my brain. I was living in Cedar Falls, Iowa, working construction, and saving every penny I could for the future I thought I had all mapped out. Margaret worked at the First National Bank downtown, behind the teller window with her bright smile and those eyes that could stop traffic on Main Street. Lord, she was something special. Auburn hair that caught the light just right, and when she laughed, it sounded like music floating through the air. We'd been together for 2.5 years, and I knew from our third date that I was going to marry that woman. Call it young love, call it foolishness. But I was certain as sunrise that Margaret Kellerman was my destiny. I worked double shifts for 8 months to save up for the ring, a beautiful half-carat diamond from Jameson's jewelry store. Cost me more than my pickup truck, but I would have paid 10 times that for the look I imagined I'd see on her face. I proposed to her on a warm September evening in 1983, right there by Sunset Lake, where we'd had our first real conversation. She said yes before I even finished asking, tears streaming down her cheeks, and I thought I was the luckiest man in all of Iowa. We set the date for June 16th, 1984, a Saturday, perfect weather for what I knew would be the perfect day. Now, Margaret came from money. Her daddy, Robert Kellerman, owned the biggest grain elevator in 3 counties, and her mama, Patricia, was what you'd call high society for Cedar Falls. They weren't thrilled about their daughter marrying a construction worker, but Margaret had a way of getting what she wanted, and she wanted me. Or so I thought. The wedding planning took on a life of its own. Patricia Kellerman turned our simple ceremony into what felt like a royal coronation. 200 guests, a 7-piece band, flowers flown in from Chicago. I just nodded along, happy to let the women handle the details while I focused on building us a future. I'd managed to scrape together enough for a down payment on a little house on Elm Street. Nothing fancy, but it had good bones and a big backyard where I pictured kids playing someday. Margaret seemed excited about everything. We'd spend hours talking about our plans, our dreams, the life we were going to build together. She'd sketch out ideas for how she wanted to decorate the house, talk about the garden she wanted to plant, even picked out names for the children we'd have. Sarah for a girl, Matthew for a boy. Everything seemed perfect, like something out of a storybook. The night before the wedding, we had the rehearsal dinner at the country club. Margaret looked absolutely radiant in her blue dress, charming everyone with her laugh and her stories. Her maid of honor, Linda Patterson, kept making jokes about how nervous brides get, but Margaret seemed calm as could be. She kissed me goodnight at the end of the evening and whispered, "Tomorrow's going to be perfect, Frank. I love you so much." Those were the last words she ever said to me. June 16th dawned clear and beautiful. Not a cloud in the sky. I was at the church by 9 in the morning, even though the ceremony wasn't until 2. My best man, Tommy Rodriguez, tried to get me to relax, maybe go grab some breakfast, but I was too excited to eat. I kept checking my watch, straightening my tie, making sure everything was perfect. The guests started arriving around 1:30. I watched through the window of the little room behind the altar as Cedar Falls's finest filed into those pews. Mrs. Henderson from the bank, the whole construction crew I worked with. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. All dressed up and smiling. The church filled up exactly like we'd planned. 2 o'clock came and went. Patricia Kellerman was pacing in the vestibule, her face getting redder by the minute. Robert kept checking his pocket watch and muttering under his breath. Linda Patterson disappeared somewhere around 2:15, probably to check on Margaret one more time. By 2:30, the murmur in the church had grown to a low rumble of confusion. People were shifting in their seats, looking around, whispering to each other. I stood at that altar, sweat beading on my forehead despite the air conditioning, telling myself there was just some last-minute emergency. Maybe her dress needed fixing, or she was stuck in traffic, though there wasn't much traffic to speak of in Cedar Falls on a Saturday afternoon. Tommy kept patting my shoulder, saying things like, "She'll be here, Frank," and "Just a little delay, buddy." But I could see the worry in his eyes, too. At 3 o'clock, Linda Patterson came back into the church alone. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. She walked straight up to Patricia Kellerman, whispered something in her ear, and I watched that woman's face crumble like old newspaper. Patricia marched up to the front of the church, her heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood floor. She leaned in close to me and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, but sharp as a knife, "She's gone, Frank. Margaret's gone. Her car's not at the house. Her suitcase is missing, and she left this." She handed me an envelope with my name written in Margaret's careful handwriting. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, just 5 words. "I'm sorry, I can't. Goodbye." That was it. No explanation, no real reason. Just those 5 words that felt like a punch to the gut. I stood there in front of 200 people, holding that piece of paper, and I felt something inside me break that I didn't think would ever heal. Patricia had to turn around and announce to the entire congregation that there wouldn't be a wedding today. People started filing out, some looking angry, others embarrassed, most just confused. A few folks came up to pat my back or mumble something about being sorry, but I barely heard them. I felt like I was underwater, like everything was happening to someone else. The next 3 weeks were the darkest of my life. I called in sick to work every day, barely ate, spent most of my time sitting in that little house on Elm Street that was supposed to be our home, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. I replayed every conversation, every moment, searching for clues I must have missed. Had I pushed too hard? Was I not good enough for her? Did she never really love me at all? Tommy and some of the other guys tried to get me out of the house, said I needed to move on, that Margaret obviously wasn't worth it if she could do something like that. But you have to understand, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was completely lost. This woman had been my entire future. My reason for working those double shifts. My reason for getting up in the morning. Without her, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I drove by her parents' house probably 50 times in those 3 weeks, always hoping to see her car in the driveway, but it was never there. Robert and Patricia wouldn't talk to me. I think they were as shocked and hurt as I was, maybe even more so because of the embarrassment of it all. Cedar Falls is a small town, and news like this travels fast. I couldn't go anywhere without people whispering and pointing. Then, on a Tuesday evening exactly 3 weeks after the wedding that never was, Linda Patterson showed up at my door. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days, and she was clutching something in her hand. "Frank," she said, "we need to talk. There are things about Margaret you don't know. Things she made me promise never to tell anyone, but I can't keep quiet anymore. Not after what she did to you." She came inside and sat down at my kitchen table, and what she told me next changed everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd loved. "Margaret was pregnant, Frank. 3 months pregnant, but it wasn't your baby." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "That's impossible," I said. "We were together almost every day." "When would she have? Remember last winter when you were working that big job over in Waterloo? The one where you were gone for 2 weeks straight?" I remembered. It was a commercial project. Good money. But it meant being away from home longer than I'd ever been since Margaret and I got together. I'd called her every night, and she'd seemed fine, said she missed me but was keeping busy. She was lonely, Frank, and scared. You two had been talking about marriage, and I think the pressure got to her. She started going out with some of us girls, just to bars and such, trying to have some fun while you were away. Linda paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "There was this man, a traveling salesman named David Pritchard. He was staying at the hotel downtown for a week, selling farm equipment or something. Charming, older, sophisticated. He swept Margaret right off her feet. I wanted to stop her from talking, but I needed to hear the rest. It was just supposed to be one night, Frank. A mistake. Margaret regretted it immediately, felt terrible about betraying you. She came to me crying, saying she was the worst person in the world, that she didn't deserve you. But then you came back, and things went back to normal. And she thought maybe she could just pretend it never happened. But she got pregnant," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She didn't know for sure until a month before the wedding. She took 3 different tests, went to a doctor in the next town over where nobody would recognize her. She was terrified, Frank. Terrified of telling you. Terrified of losing you. Terrified of what her parents would say." Linda reached across the table and took my hand. "She loved you, Frank, more than anything. But she couldn't bring herself to tell you the truth. And she couldn't live with the lie. So she ran. Where is she now? I don't know for sure. She called me once, about a week after the wedding. Said she was staying with an aunt in Oregon trying to figure out what to do next. She asked about you, wanted to know if you were okay, but she made me promise not to tell you where she was." I sat there in silence for a long time, trying to process everything Linda had told me. Part of me was angry, angrier than I'd ever been in my life. But a bigger part of me was just sad. Sad for Margaret, sad for me, sad for the baby who'd never know its father, sad for the life we'd never get to live together. "There's something else," Linda said. "The reason I'm telling you all this now. Margaret's coming back." My heart jumped. "When?" "This weekend. She's flying into Cedar Rapids on Saturday. Her aunt convinced her that she needs to face what happened, make things right somehow. She doesn't know I'm here talking to you, but Frank, I think she's hoping you might still want to see her." I didn't know what to think, what to feel. The woman I'd loved had lied to me, cheated on me, humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. But she was also scared, alone, and carrying another man's child. What kind of man did that make me if I turned my back on her now? "Will you see her?" Linda asked. I looked out the window at the yard where I'd imagined our children playing, at the swing I'd hung from the old oak tree that had never been used. "Yeah," I said, "I'll see her." That Saturday, I drove to Cedar Rapids and waited at the airport. I was nervous as a teenager on his first date, changed my shirt 3 times before leaving the house. I didn't know what I was going to say, didn't know what I was hoping for. Margaret's plane was an hour late. When she finally walked through those doors, I almost didn't recognize her. She was thinner than before, her hair cut short, and she was wearing loose clothes that couldn't quite hide the small bump at her midsection. But when our eyes met across that crowded terminal, it was like no time had passed at all. She walked over slowly, and we stood there looking at each other for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke. "Hi, Frank." "Hi, Margaret. I didn't think you'd come." "I wasn't sure I would either." We found a quiet corner of the terminal and sat down. Margaret told me everything, filling in the details that Linda had left out. About David Pritchard, and how he'd made her feel sophisticated and worldly in a way she'd never felt before. About the guilt that ate at her every day after I came back from Waterloo. About the morning sickness she'd tried to hide, and the doctor visits she'd made in secret. "I wrote you 100 letters," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Tried to explain, tried to apologize, tried to tell you the truth. But I never sent any of them, because I knew there was no excuse for what I'd done. I knew you'd never forgive me." "Would you have told me eventually?" I asked. "If you hadn't run away?" She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," she finally said. "I wanted to. Every day I wanted to tell you. But I was so scared of losing you. And then I was scared of the baby. And then I was scared of my parents' reaction. And before I knew it, we were planning a wedding, and I was supposed to be happy and excited, but all I felt was sick with dread. So you left." I panicked. Standing there in my wedding dress that morning, looking at myself in the mirror, I realized I couldn't marry you with this secret between us. I couldn't start our life together with such a terrible lie. I thought maybe it would be better for everyone if I just disappeared. We talked for hours in that airport. About the past, about the pain, about the baby she was carrying and what she planned to do. She'd decided to keep it, to raise it on her own if she had to. David Pritchard had disappeared as quickly as he'd arrived, and even if she could find him, she didn't want anything from him. "What do you want from me?" I asked her as the afternoon grew late. "Nothing," she said. "I don't deserve anything from you. I just wanted to apologize in person, to tell you that what happened wasn't about you or anything you did. You were perfect, Frank. You are perfect. I was just too young and too scared to handle what we had." I drove her back to Cedar Falls that evening. We barely spoke during the hour-long trip, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When we pulled up in front of her parents' house, she turned to me one more time. "For what it's worth," she said, "I would have said yes. If things had been different, if I hadn't messed everything up, I would have been the happiest bride in Iowa." She got out of the car and walked to the front door. I watched her go, this woman who had been my whole world just a month before, carrying another man's child and disappearing once again from my life. But here's the thing that still gets me choked up all these years later. As she reached the door, she turned around and waved. Not a sad wave, not a goodbye wave, but the same happy little wave she used to give me every morning when I dropped her off at the bank. For just that moment, it was like we were 22 again, and nothing bad had ever happened between us. I drove home that night with a strange sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken in the same way. I was sad, sure, but it was a different kind of sadness. It was sadness for what might have been, for two young people who'd loved each other but couldn't find their way through the mistakes and the fear. Margaret left town again the next week, this time for good. I heard through the grapevine that she had a baby girl that December, named her Sarah, just like we'd planned. Linda told me she moved to Seattle, got a job with a bank out there, eventually married a good man who adopted Sarah and loved her like his own. As for me, I sold that little house on Elm Street and moved out here to Nebraska a year later. Started fresh, met my dear wife Helen about 5 years after that, and we had 38 wonderful years together before the Lord called her home. We never had children of our own, never quite worked out that way, but we had a good life filled with love and laughter and the kind of quiet happiness that sustains you through the years. But I never forgot Margaret. Never forgot that summer when love broke my heart. and then somehow, in the strangest way, set it free. I've thought about her often over the years, wondered how her life turned out, whether she was happy, whether Sarah grew up knowing how much her mother had loved and lost before she was born. And now here I am, an old man telling stories to strangers on the internet, trying to make sense of all the ways love can surprise us, hurt us, heal us, and change us. Because that's what Margaret did to me. She broke my heart, yes. But she also taught me that love isn't always about getting what you want. Sometimes it's about understanding what someone else needed, even when that need takes them away from you. Well, folks, that's my story about Margaret Kellerman and the wedding that never was. I hope it touched something in you, made you think about the people in your own life who've shaped you in ways both beautiful and painful. If you've got a story like this of your own, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if this old rambler managed to entertain you for an hour or so, would you mind hitting that like button? It really does help more people find these stories. And remember what I said at the beginning about that subscribe button? 96% of you beautiful souls watching this aren't subscribed, and it just breaks my heart a little bit. If these stories mean something to you, if they make you feel a little less alone in this crazy world, please consider subscribing. It doesn't cost you anything, but it means everything to an old storyteller like me. Until next time, this is Frank Morrison from After Her Lies, reminding you that love is the most complicated, beautiful, heartbreaking, and wonderful thing we humans do. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.